The silence after the snow stopped was more frightening than artillery. Erich sat with his back against a spruce, his breath freezing inside the wool mask until it crusted to ice. Each exhale condensed, then hardened against the knit. He counted to 200 anyway. In the woods there was only the wind hissing over the treetops and, faint far off, the steady thrum of engines. That was the American side. 3 hours earlier, the infiltration detachment had been scattered by a sudden bombardment and a blizzard that came out of nowhere. The plan had been simple: slip through, regroup, move again. But the shelling came too fast, the snow too thick. At the rendezvous point there were only churned footprints and a few puddles of brownish red already frozen hard. The rest was absence. He was alone. Cold was an enemy you could touch. It climbed from his soaked boots, gnawing at his toes, then cinched tight around his calves. The field rations had run out yesterday. His stomach had shrunk into a hard, icy knot. Worse than hunger was the loss of control. He had been an MP once, and disorder made him anxious in a way hunger never could. A missing rope of routine, a broken chain of command, those were injuries you could feel. He pulled off his right glove and checked the bolt on his MP40, making sure it hadn't frozen. The motion was practiced, professional, almost ritual. It was one of the habits that had kept him alive on the Eastern Front. The weapon must work always, especially when everything else didn't. When the world slipped, he could still count on metal, spring, and muscle memory. He had to move. Staying put meant dying, either freezing in place or being plucked out by an American patrol like a rabbit in the snow. The shelling might have exposed the area, and the Americans would sweep it sooner or later. With effort, he wrenched his legs free of the drifts and started away from the engine noise toward the southeast. The forest rolled in low rises, the snow hid ditches and broken branches, and every step drained him. He forced himself to ignore the pain in his calves and the growing blur at the edges of his vision, and focused instead on observation. Bullet scars in trunks, a strip of torn webbing snagged on bark, an ammo crate tossed aside in haste, the direction of wheel ruts. These were intelligence, small clues that let him rebuild a map of what had passed through here, and therefore a fragment of control. That was what police work had taught him before this war, and during it the world left prints. Even in snow you could read intent, the angle of a boot heel, the panic in a dropped strap, the way a unit's tracks widened when discipline broke. When he had worn the white armband himself, he had taken comfort in those small certainties. A man could lie, but the ground could not. Now he used the same habit to steady his nerves. Every minute he stayed moving, every decision grounded in something he could see, was a thin layer of order laid over panic. The cold tried to strip that order away. His toes burned, then went numb. His fingers ached whenever he flexed them. Hunger made him irritable, then dull. He forced himself to take short rests, never long enough to stiffen completely, and to keep breathing through his nose so his teeth wouldn't chatter. He had seen men freeze in place because they let fatigue decide for them. He would not let fatigue write his ending. After nearly an hour, he found a narrow track through the trees, used but not much. The ruts were fresh. Following them, he came around a low hill and saw something overturned. An American Willys Jeep lay on its side in a ditch. The hood was gone. The body was pocked with bullet holes and blackened by fire. The dead had been removed. All that remained was burned oil, scattered metal, and the faint stink of old smoke. Erich lay flat on the snowy slope and watched for 10 minutes. When he saw no movement and heard no voices, he slid down into the ditch. He scavenged systematically. The glove compartment, pried open with his bayonet, held half a crushed pack of Lucky Strikes, a comic soaked through, and a box of 45 pistol rounds. No use to him. Under the passenger seat, he found an M1 carbine, but the bolt was frozen solid. He tried it once, felt the refusal, and tossed it aside rather than waste time. He checked the floor for maps and orders, found only damp paper stuck to the rubber mat. In the rear, he found empty cans and a first aid kit. He shook it once and heard liquid slosh, antifreeze or water mixed with oil. He searched for maps, passes, or a radio handset, but the dashboard was gutted and the seat cushions had been cut open, as if someone else had already taken what mattered. He checked the pockets of the burned canvas, found only damp paper and grit. Still, even scraps had value. The cigarettes could be traded, the morphine could buy cooperation or silence, and the jacket could buy time. The best find was in a crushed canvas pack, 3 military chocolate bars, hard as stone, and an olive drab American M1943 field jacket, a bit too large. The elbows were worn thin, but the rest was intact. He stripped off his soaked German camouflage smock and pulled the American jacket over his field uniform. Oversized was good. It blurred his outline and hid the cut beneath. There were no unit patches on it. Better. He snapped off a piece of chocolate with effort and held it in his mouth, letting body heat melt it slowly. The sugar brought a thin, unreal warmth and a touch of clarity. It wasn't nourishment so much as permission to think. He needed more supplies. More than that, he needed direction, an opening to disappear into a crowd. A lone soldier in the open couldn't last long, not with patrols and frost and the simple arithmetic of exhaustion. When he set out again, he felt marginally better, but the objective was still uncertain. Wearing an American jacket meant he had to be careful. Avoid German fire from behind and American patrols from ahead. He left the track and pushed back into the forest, searching for a concealed route, something that would keep him out of open sight but still lead toward roads and people. He moved with the old caution of a man trained to police others, ears open, head turning, feet placed so he could pull them free quickly if he had to. In the afternoon, thin sunlight tried to break through cloud cover, throwing mottled shadows across the snow. That was when he caught a different smell in the air, sweet, faint, and wrong, not rot, not smoke, something human. He dropped low and peered forward through brush. Ahead lay a small clearing. 6 or 7 bodies were frozen in twisted poses, German gray-green mixed with American olive drab. Scattered weapons and gear showed a close-range encounter, a smashed rifle stock, a dropped helmet, a belt of ammunition, half buried in snow, a grenade pouch torn open. The snowfall had buried most of the blood, but it hadn't buried death. No one living, no voices, no movement, only the static, terrible stillness of men interrupted. Erich's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from opportunity. Cleanup might not have reached this spot, or it was one of the countless small contact points both sides forgot, a place too small to matter until someone needed it. He needed information, and if he was lucky, food. He slid to the edge of the clearing, eyes moving fast. First he checked for tripwires, mines, anything that looked like a trap. The snow helped hide wires. It also made them visible when the wrong straight line cut through. He saw none. A German soldier lay face down across a tree root, helmet rolled away, a neat bullet hole in the back of the skull. Erich didn't linger. He went to the nearest American. A young soldier lay on his back, eyes fixed on the gray-white sky, mouth slightly open. Erich searched the pockets, cigarettes and family photos, no food. Another American lay curled with a canteen at his side, The water inside was frozen solid. Then he saw the third. This one sat half-slumped against a tree, as if he'd tried to reach cover after being hit. The fatal wound was in the chest, the overcoat hanging open. What caught Erich's eye was the glint of a metal chain at the man's neck, and, from the cuff, a flash of silver, a bracelet. Erich crouched and scanned the trees, listening. Only wind. He hooked a finger under the chain and drew it out. 2 stainless steel dog tags slid into view, clicking softly together. In the dim light, he could make out the stamp, name, serial number, blood type, religion, John Smith. He wiped the tags clean. The cold bite of metal in his hand gave him a strange sense of solidity. In the American system, dog tags meant a person existed on paper, in lists, in files. It meant there was a slot for him in the machinery, a place where questions had pre-written answers. If he could step into that slot, he could move through spaces that would kill a nameless man. His gaze returned to the bracelet, cheap silver-colored chain, small rectangular plate. He eased it off and leaned close to read the engraving inside. For John, love, Anna, 20town, Ohio. Cheap, sharp-edged, private. Erich closed his fist around tags and bracelet. The metal pressed into his skin. The decision formed without debate. A former MP understood what identifiers did. They created order, and order created access. At the edge of the clearing, where the snow lay deeper, he knelt and worked his bayonet down into the frozen earth, carving out a small hole. He took the oval German identity tags from his own neck, tags that named him, that proved what he was, and dropped them in. Dirt went back over them, then snow. He stamped it down until the surface looked like nothing had happened. Now, on paper and metal, Erich no longer existed. He hung the American dog tags around his neck. The cold steel lay flat against his chest. The bracelet went on to his left wrist, hidden under the jacket sleeve. When it was done, he looked once more at the frozen dead. There was nothing else he could use. He had to leave before the clearing attracted anyone else. A name gave him direction. He was no longer a man fleeing without aim. He was a soldier with a unit, with a record, even if it was wrong. Training had given him a rough map of the American rear, primary supply routes, secondary roads, the rhythm of checkpoints. He should push southeast toward busier roads and logistical nodes. More people, more vehicles, more food and warmth, and more risk. A stricter net, yes, but a net had knots, and knots were patterns you could study. For years he had watched men at checkpoints soften or harden depending on what their papers said. An identity wasn't only a name, it was a set of expectations other people carried in their heads. If he looked exhausted, spoke little, and let the dog tags do the talking, most Americans would do what organizations always did. They would route him along the standard path for one of ours. He wrapped his MP40 in a scrap of canvas and tucked it under his arm so it might pass at a distance for a tool or a length of wood. As he walked, he began weaving details. John Smith from Ohio. Unit designation from the tags, ambushed by German infiltrators, separated from the squad. The story had to be simple and plausible, able to survive a couple of questions. He trusted his observation, his memory, his ability to perform. American MPs, he told himself, would match paperwork and ask formula questions. The right answers, delivered without drama, would be enough. The forest closed behind him, swallowing the clearing. The cold still cut, but the familiar urge to regain control began to press back against the physical misery. He still had cards to play. The faint track became clearer, then fed into a wider dirt road with crisscrossing wheel ruts. Erich lay in a drainage ditch and watched for nearly half an hour. A secondary supply road, light traffic. Two 10-wheel trucks loaded with supplies rolled west, tarps closed, soldiers in the cabs yawning. No jeeps, no armored vehicles. Patrol density was low. He needed a place where he could appear naturally, near a small outpost or checkpoint, so his story, a straggler separated from his unit, would fit. He moved east along the forest edge parallel to the road, careful to keep his distance. After an hour, the road bent, and a crude wooden guard booth came into view. A chipped gate arm lay across the road. A jeep sat nearby, under a rain tarp. Only one sentry stood outside, bundled up and stamping his feet, rifle leaning against the booth wall. It looked temporary, more about logging traffic than hunting infiltrators. Erich took a breath, pulled the canvas-wrapped MP40 free, and stuffed it into a hollow tree, covering it quickly with snow and dead branches. He couldn't show up with a German weapon. He turned up the collar of the American jacket, rubbed snow water and dirt into his face, and made himself look spent. The tags were cold at his chest. The bracelet stayed hidden. He stepped out of the trees and walked, slightly stumbling, toward the checkpoint. The sentry heard the crunch of snow and spun, hand going to his holster. "Hold it," the private called, flat Midwestern accent. "Show your ID." Erich raised both hands. "Easy, buddy." Friendly. "John Smith, 28th Infantry Division, 110th Regiment, Company F. We hit an ambush up north in the woods. Got scattered." He reached slowly into his jacket and offered the dog tags. The private studied them, then looked Erich up and down. Oversized jacket with no patch, worn boots with no clear issue pattern. Suspicion lingered in the way the private's eyes kept returning to Erich's face, as if language might leak through skin. "Company F?" the private said. "I thought they moved east of St. Vith a few days ago. How'd you end up down here south?" Erich kept his face slack with fatigue. "Shelling in the blizzard, sir. Everything got screwed up. We got orders to pull in southeast, but infiltrators cut through and comms went down. I lost the guys I was with. Been wandering 2 days. I just need the nearest supply point, something to eat, warm up. Then I'll rejoin." The private stared into his eyes, weighing him. Then he handed the tags back and produced a damp logbook and a pencil. "Sign in. Name, serial number, last unit, where you're headed." Erich wrote what the tags said. John Smith, serial number, 28th Infantry Division, 110th Regiment, Company F. Destination? Looking for a division rear area collection point. The handwriting came out crooked, appropriate. The private waved him past. "Follow this road east about 3 miles. Junction, right turn another mile. You'll see a field kitchen and some tents." Then, almost casually, "And watch yourself. MPs might be set up down the road. They check harder." Erich thanked him and walked under the raised gate arm. Only when the bend hid the booth did he let himself breathe. The first hurdle had held. The sentry had checked the tags, asked a couple of questions, and moved on. Erich's confidence returned. Paperwork first, thinking second. If that was the standard, he could work with it. He even felt briefly the old contempt of an MP watching civilians fumble with documents. He headed east, alert for signs of a stricter checkpoint. Passing vehicles through slush. He kept his head down and avoided eye contact. After more than a mile, he found discarded cans and the remains of a fire on the roadside, then an abandoned foxhole near the tree line, damp boards, torn canvas. He rested long enough to let his fingers stop shaking. He repeated his story until it sounded like memory and folded in new details. East of St. Vythe, Company F, 2 days wandering, communications down. In the foxhole, he also thought about his hidden MP-40. He could not leave it forever, but he could not risk carrying it through a real MP checkpoint either. A weapon was proof of intent, and intent was what men searched for when fear rose. If he could reach a larger rear area collection point, he might move on with nothing but a knife and the right identity. Later, if the chance came, he could retrieve another weapon, American or German. The calculus was cold. Survive first, arm yourself second. He rehearsed the small details that made a story believable. The way a private complained about cold, the way he avoided officers, the way he spoke in short sentences as if too tired for drama. Then he pushed himself up and moved, because even a good plan was worthless if his feet stopped. 15 miles away, the 28th Infantry Division headquarters was doing its own work. In a basement office, the G1 personnel section updated the division roster from a stack of delayed reports. Corporal Raymond Kalinsky, pale and bespectacled, had been at the desk for hours. One document listed a John Smith serial number matching 110th Regiment, Company F, killed on December 18th, chest wound, body recovered, one dog tag missing. Kalinsky marked the roster, KIA. Another document arrived out of sequence, a field hospital entry for the same John Smith, same serial number, treated for a minor shrapnel graze on December 17th and expected to return to duty. The dates didn't reconcile. In the Ardennes, nothing reconciled cleanly. Forms arrived late, units shifted, names repeated. Still, the mismatch was a mismatch, and Kalinsky's job was to make the records match reality as closely as possible. He didn't have the luxury of guessing. He checked the file, then called the regiment clerk. The answer was simple and ugly. Company F had taken hits and stragglers in the chaos. Regiment confirmed Smith as killed on the 18th and confirmed one dog tag missing. The earlier hospital line was likely a bad registration or a hurried misreport of a man assumed to be a light casualty before he was confirmed dead. That was enough for the roster, but not enough to ignore the missing tag. Procedure required a note. Tag, possibly in circulation. Detain any bearer for verification. Kalinsky wrote a short advisory, had it signed, and dropped it into the outgoing basket for dispatch to the division MP company on the next run. It would travel slowly, but it would travel. Erich rose from the foxhole and moved again. He found the junction the sentry had described. After the turn, smoke rose above tents in a clearing, a field kitchen, and a temporary collection point. Men, vehicles, noise, and warmth. His heartbeat picked up. It was a larger test and a better chance. He set his shoulders into the posture of a drained straggler and walked in. The place ran on rough routine. Dozens of tents sat scattered across the clearing, and vehicles cut muddy snow ruts between them. The air smelled of stew, diesel, and wet canvas. Men leaned against crates smoking. Others hunched near a barrel stove, hands out, eyes empty. Chaos, but with the kind of order that emerges when everyone wants the same few things: heat, food, somewhere to sit, something to do with your hands besides tremble. Erich lined up at the kitchen, accepted a ladle of thick beans and half a brick of bread, and ate standing with his back to a truck wheel. Warmth spread through his gut like a small lie. While he ate, he watched faces, tired, bored, anxious, but not alert. This wasn't a front-line foxhole. It was a machine room, feeding men and pushing them onward. When he finished, he drifted to a supply tent and asked for socks and gloves. A sergeant, eyes on a sheet, asked only, "Unit, name?" Erich answered, 28th Division, 110th, Company F, John Smith. The sergeant checked a box and handed him wool socks and knit gloves without looking up. No one asked for a face, only a line on a page. It was almost too easy. Erich changed socks in a corner, warmed his fingers, and listened for what mattered. Men complained about traffic control and curfews, about MPs stopping trucks over passes and paperwork. A few spoke in the flat, fatal tone of rumor. Someone caught last night speaking German near a line unit. Someone else pulled off the road and searched for hours. Then a voice, bitter and amused, said, "Those checkpoint boys have lists so long you could wear 'em like a scarf." Lists, bulletins, names and items to watch for. Risk, but also a system, which meant rules he might exploit, or rules that might catch him. He couldn't know what was on those lists, but he told himself that a straggler identity would be safe unless his name was already flagged. He touched the metal at his chest. Cold and falsely reassuring. If John Smith was clean, then John Smith could eat, sleep, and move. He stayed only long enough to rebuild strength and collect scraps of information about roads, which direction trucks were flowing, which junctions were jammed, where MPs were rumored to be strictest. After dark, he found space in a crowded tent, slept lightly, one hand always near the bayonet in his boot. Before dawn, he slipped out, taking an old poncho tossed over a crate and half a packet of compressed biscuits left behind. Then he headed east again, deeper toward main roads and the larger net he thought he could read. By mid-morning, the advisory about John Smith's missing dog tag reached the Division MP Company with a bundle of other notices. It arrived the way most things arrived in war, late, damp, and mixed with other paper. A clerk skimmed it, filed it, and handed it up for briefing. At a routine briefing, the duty officer read it in the same level tone as everything else. Deceased soldier John Smith. One tag missing. If the tag appeared on a person, detain and verify. Most men heard it and moved on. There were always more bulletins than memory. The MP tent was crowded with the small machinery of control. Phones ringing, dispatch riders dropping muddy bundles of paper, white helmeted men coming and going with clipboards. New orders arrived every hour, traffic rules, curfew lines, known infiltrator tricks, warnings about stolen vehicles and forged passes. Most of it blurred together, but a missing dog tag tied to a confirmed dead man was different. It was a clean, specific anomaly, the kind that could be matched with almost no judgment at all. Sergeant Miller did not. He ran the key checkpoint at a main road crossroads, and he trusted lists more than instincts. In his worn leather notebook, among curfew times, road restrictions, and vehicle authorizations, he wrote one clean line: John Smith, dog tag XXX, detained for verification. Then he closed the book and put it back in his pocket, as if tucking away certainty. That afternoon, Erich's travel grew harder. The dirt road merged into a broader gravel road with heavier traffic, trucks, jeeps, occasional artillery tractors. A man on foot stood out. He stayed close to the tree line, crossing only when he had to, timing his movement between vehicles. On a rise overlooking the road, he ate a little biscuit with snow and checked the bracelet again. For John, love, Anna, 20-town, Ohio. The words felt absurdly intimate against his skin, a borrowed tenderness stitched to a stolen name. He rehearsed once how he might mention Anna, if pressed, quiet, restrained, the way a tired American private might speak of home without wanting to look weak. Details, he reminded himself, were how you sold a lie. Then he pulled the poncho tighter and walked on. Less than a mile ahead, the road split and slowed. Sandbags, tents, barbed wire, and MPs in white helmets came into view. The crossroads checkpoint. Vehicles were funneled into lanes for inspection. Foot travelers queued to one side. Erich took his place at the back and watched the sergeant who ran it, middle-aged, precise, eyes moving between dog tags and a notebook as if matching codes. He didn't wave anyone through on instinct. He raised tags to eye level, compared them to the notebook line by line, and asked short questions that sounded ordinary but required the right answers at the right time. Where your company had been yesterday, what route you'd used, who your platoon sergeant was. A man who hesitated was directed to a side tent for more checks. One soldier ahead of Erich tried to joke his way through the line, smiling too hard. Miller ignored the smile and asked where the man's company had bivouacked 2 nights ago. The answer came a beat late. Miller's pencil paused. The smile faltered. Without raising his voice, Miller nodded to an MP who guided the man to the side tent. It looked almost gentle, like traffic control, and that was what made it terrifying. Erich adjusted his own posture, his face, his breathing, drained but not scared, eager to rejoin, not eager to argue. He watched the sergeant's rhythm and built his own to match it, smoothing the edges of his story until there was nothing to catch on. When it was his turn, the sergeant looked up without warmth. ID. Erich lifted the dog tags off his neck and handed them over. John Smith. Serial number 3X, 28th Division, 110th Regiment, Company F. The voice was hoarse, controlled. Miller ran a finger along the stamped grooves, then opened the leather notebook. A few seconds passed. Wind hissed over the road and engines throbbed in the distance. Miller's eyes flicked between metal and paper and stopped. No dramatic reaction, just a subtle shift, the tiniest click of confirmation. He closed the notebook and looked at Erich again, more closely, as if committing his face to a different kind of record. Company F, Miller said evenly. On the 17th, after the attack near Liller, what direction did your company move? Southeast, Sergeant, Erich said at once, trying to fall back toward regiment. Then we got shelled again, scattered. Miller nodded, neither agreeing nor doubting, and asked another question, deceptively casual. Your company commander, Lieutenant Clark, where does he usually set the CP? Tree line or a farmhouse with stone walls? Erich kept exhaustion in his face. Sorry, Sergeant, I'm a private. I'm not around Company HQ much. That day was chaos. I was just trying to keep up. A private could say that truthfully. Miller didn't argue. He shifted to the next line of procedure. You've only got the one tag? Erich pointed at the mud on his clothes. Must have come off. I looked. Miller nodded again and gave a tiny chin gesture to 2 MPs waiting nearby. They stepped in from both sides. Sir, Miller said, still calm, put your hands where we can see them. We're verifying you further. Why? Erich let confusion and offense into his voice. I'm just trying to get back to my unit. Procedure, Miller said, as if that explained everything, which to him it did. One MP searched Erich quickly and found the bayonet. Another kept a carbine ready. Miller reached up, lifted the chain at Erich's neck, and yanked. It snapped. With the tag in his hand, Miller compared the stamp number to the notebook line again, carefully, as if he had time in the world. He checked once, then again, making sure the paper and the metal truly matched. Then he turned to the Jeep radio. Command post, this is Crossroads Station 7. List item B7. Dog tag matched. Subject secured. Confirm silver bracelet present. Over. Confirmation crackled back. Plastic restraints tightened around Erich's wrists. No shouting, no theatrics. Just procedure executed at speed. He was marched to a canvas-topped truck painted with white MP and pushed inside onto a cold metal bench. The canvas flap dropped, turning the world dim and small. As the truck jolted away, Erich felt something collapse that wasn't flesh. There had been no heroic chase, no brilliant duel of minds. He had been caught the way a bad entry in a ledger was caught, matched, flagged, removed. He remembered how he had once written up minor violations, missing travel passes, unauthorized movements, and how those reports had taken on a life beyond the people involved. Someone stamped them, someone filed them, someone used them to justify another checkpoint. Back then he had called it efficiency. Now he felt the other side of it. The way a sentence on paper could become a hand on your shoulder. After half an hour, the truck stopped at a larger MP compound. He was processed in a warm tent. Photo, fingerprints, inventory of seized items. An officer asked his real name and unit. Erich stayed silent. The officer didn't rage. He dictated to a clerk, "Impersonation infiltrator, in possession of deceased U.S. soldier dog tag and personal bracelet, detained at Crossroads checkpoint via list item B7. Send copies to counterintelligence in G1. The clerk typed without looking up, as if this were a truck count. As Erich was led to a holding tent, he glimpsed clerks at typewriters, stacks of folders, lists on walls. A report was stamped and filed into a box marked "Resolved." The motion was indifferent, practiced, final. The loop closed with a stamp, and the stamp sounded like a door. Inside the holding tent, the cold returned in a different form. He thought of Miller's eyes on the notebook, of the phrase on the radio, list item B7, of the stamp hitting paper and the file box swallowing him. He hadn't lost to a man with greater courage or cunning. He hadn't even lost, really, to Miller. He had lost to a system that turned soldiers into numbers and treated anomalies as errors to be corrected. His skills, deception, improvisation, reading faces, were precise tools, but they were meant for locks. Against a wall of poured concrete, they did nothing. Days later, during routine questioning, the bracelet's engraving, Anna's name, the town in Ohio, helped prove what the tag already suggested. He was not John Smith. He was transferred to a rear POW camp. There, he watched guards change shifts, count heads, match numbers to lists, record every change. Every correction had a form. Every form had a place. The guards weren't cruel. They were administrative. In the camp, he listened to English more closely than before. He noticed how often the guards said check and verify, how frequently they called out numbers instead of names. He watched a clerk correct a single digit on a roster and then, because the digit changed, move a man from one work detail to another. It was absurd, and it was decisive. War produced chaos at the front, but behind the front, order was rebuilt daily out of ink and habit. The machine was slow, often clumsy, always hungry for paper, but its mechanical habit of verification, the way it kept turning even in chaos, was a kind of armor. Erich, former MP, infiltrator, a man who had tried to manipulate order, had been caught as a standard specimen and filed away. There was no grand ending, only a footnote in some rear area report. One missing dog tag, one seized infiltrator, one anomaly closed.